Welcome everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes to allow people time to get their tech organized and joined. We don't have any hold music, sadly, but I just wanted to check, Warner, and so you can see my screen. Yeah, awesome. All right. For people who just joined, we're just going to wait a few minutes for everybody to connect. I know certainly if I'm leaving straight from a meeting, it can take me quite a few minutes to situate myself for the next one. Yeah, I think we'll make just one more minute. I can see some familiar faces who have joined us. So welcome, familiar faces. You know who you are. And for anybody who's joined, we're just waiting a few moments. Probably just one more minute, and then we'll get started. All right, everybody, how do we feel about getting started? I think we may as well kick off. Everyone's time is valuable. So hello, everybody, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So, welcome everybody. My name is Kirsty Miller, Head of Strategy and Growth at DS, not dinner, goodness me. And it's my pleasure to host today's session. For those of you who know us at DS, hello again, it's lovely to see you. For those of you who are new, a quick introduction about who we are and what we do. We're an Australian technology consulting company that builds custom software and hardware solutions for clients. We have a very unique and broad skill set that spans data, devices, design, digital, and AI, making us the perfect choice for clients who are looking to build intelligent products. But obviously more recently, like everyone around us, we've been doing a lot around AI, both in terms of building AI-powered products and features for our clients, but also in using AI tools to help us deliver that work. So today's topic is a really good fit for us. Before we jump in, I guess I just want to acknowledge something that many engineering leaders are probably seeing right now. If you read, all the interviews and the case studies and all of the media about AI-assisted software development, you'll see companies saying things like 80% of our code is generated by AI, or even things like, we're building almost everything with AI. And it can make you wonder, are we behind? Should we be moving faster? There's this sense of anxiety, I think, sometimes. But, the reality is that adoption is very mixed. And if you're thinking seriously about these questions, you're here today, you're probably not behind. But this space is moving quickly, so standing still isn't the answer either. And I guess the challenge is not just adopting tools. It's really evolving how we can build software without losing the things that matter. So this is good architecture, strong security, robustness, and confidence in delivery. We know the organizations that we see out there seeing durable gains, they're not throwing away good software engineering principles. Sure, there's a change, but they're adapting how they work while staying anchored in them. So today we want to talk about what actually works in practice and how to measure whether or not AI is making a difference. And here to help me do this are Warner Godfrey and Sergei Matheson. Welcome. Two of our most experienced engineering experts, both principal consultants, and both with a wealth of experience from building greenfields, from modernizing core systems to working in a wide variety of domains. And I guess also, they're seasoned practitioners and they've seen it all. They were there for the adoption of Agile. They're there for the adoption of cloud, which really was not so long ago. Sorry, Warner. Serge. So we thought rather than just, presenting a series of slides, it would be much more useful to have a sort of an expert session where you hear directly from the people who are navigating this challenge. So if you work in engineering, you've all rolled out software tools. And, the conversation now is shifting from access and experimentation to impact. So let's start there. So Serge, I want to start with you. When leaders read, these big AI engineering stories, what do you think they're missing?
Well, I'll preface this with, I think, something that applies to everything we discuss here, which is this is an incredibly quickly evolving space. And this is what we think currently. This is based on past experience. Ask us again in 3 months, and we'll give you hopefully a better answer.
Yeah.
But I think one of the core issues is that engineering leaders often mistake access to the tools for a valid operating model. Engineering leaders focus on the wrong things sometimes. It's not just making Claude code available. How does the process work at a team level? So we shouldn't just be focusing on individual productivity. We want a solid, reliable delivery system that uses AI and leverages it to its fullest. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty about how teams should work differently. They're given tools, but they're not given a benchmark. They're not given structures for how you should be using these tools. So as a consequence, quality and trust issues emerge, especially as the amount of code going to production increases as a factor of AI agents being used to scale that code. How do you know it works as it should? So there's a buildup of a kind of cognitive debt of code that no one understands, becoming the new tech debt. So what we've noticed in practice is that, in a team, 1 or 2 engineers might get very fast, but testing, review, product decisions, operations all still move at the old speed. So the challenge is not, do we have the tools? It's, do we know how to use them in a way that improves delivery across the entire product lifecycle, across the entire team? So there was a major Australian company that I worked with that mandated Claude code for everyone, for all engineers. They'd paid a lot for tokens, but they'd still only managed to deliver a couple of web forms over the course of 2 months. The AI agent wasn't the problem. The process was.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, Serge. Thank you. So I guess one of the things, that we've talked about, I talk a lot with you and Warner about, this notion of like, where should we be? Like, what should we be aiming for? What does good look like? And we see these maturity models doing the rounds. I guess there's one out there at the moment. I don't know if everyone's seen it. It's by a very experienced, somewhat outspoken software engineer named Steve Yegg. Some of you will know him. He does a lot of writing and speaking on how to use AI tools. He's written a book. I guess, Warner, is that a useful way to think about what's happening right now and what teams should be aiming for?
Look, it's somewhat useful and definitely describes the evolution that we're seeing with clients adopting AI tools. And typically we're seeing people getting to the stage of relying less on the IDE and the autocomplete and moving, and I guess letting go of the steering wheel a little bit. And moving towards like a Claude Code type model where you are driving the agent using your prompts. But I guess what it doesn't describe is the prerequisites to achieving those levels, or how to mitigate the risks of adopting more and more agentic workflows. So, and I guess especially I'm finding that sort of level 3, you'll see on the left, the individual workflows, running the agents without permission checks, which is a risky proposition and shouldn't be taken lightly. So I guess there's also the impacts of what the AI maturity might have on the rest of the pipeline. And it's very quickly going to start to impact the review and verification stages of the pipeline, put pressure on those, and also then getting up to the sort of multi-agent workflows. One of the examples that I've seen is, it's important to make tools available to support both types of workflows, and also some guidance on when it's appropriate. Using orchestrated agents is not really suitable for some of those smaller scoped and simpler tasks that could be readily achieved using a single agent.
Yeah. I definitely think that there's an important takeaway there about not leaning into lines of code, thinking more about your individual use case. Yeah. Okay, so I guess the next thing I wanted to ask is, let's break that down a little bit more concretely. Warner, what does this practice look like? So when teams start really getting value from AI, like what actually changes in how they work?
Fundamentally, the principles shouldn't change. Just the way that they're achieved. So, and I guess the practices, they might be things like automated testing. They need to be robust enough to handle the increased velocity that is achievable with some of the AI tools. So I guess, and with that comes more feedback more often. So you need to be able to pay attention to that feedback, and it's going to grab your attention. So you need mechanisms to keep track of all that, I guess, noise, and work out what the next step to take. So I guess some of those things could in turn be solved with AI, and I guess we're going to start to see more and more happening in that space. But I think as far as what good looks like, there's going to have to be a level of verification with the output of our teams with using these tools, and that means that test automation is increasingly important. So capturing, and not just testing how something works, it's testing the desired behavior and focusing on that. And it's not to say that everything's going to become an end-to-end test, and because that's going to cause its own problems with slow running suites, but having that behavior orientated perspective in the test suites at different levels. And with that becomes, the evidence we've seen is the more modular and more loosely coupled a code base is the easier. It's easier for AI and humans to comprehend. So those, positive, or let's say, what we're trying to achieve with architecture and software architecture is still relevant. But I guess coming back to the original question, I think where what will change in an organisation is providing these tools and also a safe environment for the tools to run. So there's a lot of security controls that have to be put in place, access to data in a safe way, and also the ability to actually make your code bases and data available to a model that you have somewhat, some controls over. And so that's a big operational concern.
Yes, yes, and I think that's a really important takeaway, and it becomes more important when your practice becomes a bit more mature and you're starting to use, more agents. It's all about agents at the moment for everybody. So let's talk about agents specifically. So what happens when teams move in that direction?
Definitely, there's more pressure on the review and verification side of things. So the number of changes, hopefully not the size of the changes. That's probably a smell that needs to be addressed in the way that the tools are being used, is to guide them a little bit more into making concise and deliberate change. So that's that's going to put a lot of pressure, especially on senior members of the team, to review that code. And it can quickly get out of hand and become a bigger bottleneck than ever. So some of the things we're seeing to counteract that is, more reliance on some of those software quality verification tools in pipelines and putting those things into checks before there's a human review. And then looking, and there's opportunity to start to look at the change from various different perspectives before you get a set of eyeballs on it. And then beyond that, we've seen examples in, I guess, the more that someone with businesses with a healthy risk appetite is relying less on the human review and more on the increased monitoring and self-healing capabilities within their system. So that's one end of the spectrum. But I guess that confidence needs to come from somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we just talked about agents and testing and all of these different things. But I guess this is an important point to make, is AI shouldn't just be seen as an engineering tool. There are other roles involved in the software delivery product lifecycle. So Serge, I've heard you talk quite passionately about this. Why do you see this as something that affects the whole product lifecycle, and what happens if organizations only optimize engineering?
To be honest, I think people seeing AI agents and AI in general as something that is really only useful for engineering is a very reductive point of view that's going to hamper you over the long term, even the medium term. AI has value before engineering starts, after code is written, in discovery, in shaping the product, design, debugging, support, operations, maintenance. You can use AI to add value at any stage in the product lifecycle. So if engineering is the only thing that gets faster, the only thing that you use AI tooling on, then the rest of the delivery system becomes the bottleneck. And that just means you're moving fast in one little area, but as a whole, you're just as slow as you ever were. So really, this is about augmenting the product team and the delivery lifecycle, not just helping developers type faster. Leaders should really think about the full loop of delivery. So ideas to building, to releasing, to monitoring, to debugging, to improving. If AI acts as an accelerant, it needs to accelerate maintenance, confidence, and learning as well, not just development. So I've talked to some of my former colleagues, some of whom now either run their own companies or are heads of engineering, One thing that stood out in companies that most successfully adopted AI was that willingness to investigate using it at every stage of the product lifecycle. So not just helping developers type faster, but building self-healing systems that, connecting observability through to an AI agent discovering that there is a bug, submitting a pull request for a self-healing system, providing guardrails and workflows for non-technical contributors. So, a lot of things get left to the bottom of the backlog, and we don't want to focus engineering effort on them. But there are product owners, product managers, even customer support who are really passionate and want to contribute features. How do we best make it so that they can leverage AI tooling to do so? But at the same time, make sure that the things they're working on aren't going to negatively affect the product. So a friend of mine implemented a traffic light system for contributions. So if there's red, this is not something you want to work on without an engineer present. If it's green, absolutely. You as a non-technical contributor can definitely make a difference here. So it takes a bit of thinking about how to apply AI augmented engineering and AI agents to the entire product lifecycle.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's an awesome example, Serge. Of course, we would like to point out that your friend doesn't work in a large enterprise, so it's really horses. It's really horses for courses, right? You need to consider your environment, the skills of your people, and how you're going to enable them. And then,
just before we move on, he absolutely does. He is the person I'm thinking of is in a smaller environment, which does allow them to be a bit more nimble. But a lot of the same lessons can be taken by larger enterprises. It's a question of how you actually scale up the concepts.
That's right. That's right. And I think this raises a really important, leadership question around confidence. In order to commit to doing something like that, leaders really need to maintain confidence. If you're accelerating speed, if you're generating more code. So, Warner, how do leaders maintain confidence in what's being built?
Look, there's confidence, and there's I guess some of that comes from what we already know is keeping the changes small and releasing often, and the evidence has shown that results in higher reliability and less incidents, using the concepts behind continuous delivery. So that doesn't change. Just the rate of change is going to increase. So it's like driving. The faster you go, the more risk there is of something catastrophic happening. So it's being aware of those risks and driving to the conditions, as my dad would always say. So and I guess adopting these tools, it's working in those low risk areas. So you might have, if you're in the payment industry, you'll have PCI compliant, pieces of code which need to undergo review and be compliant with the PCI regulations. So you wouldn't, unleash an agent on that code. You would work in a low risk area first. And like with that traffic light area, you might have the different levels of controls that you employ. So identifying, and I think as an industry, we've got to get a lot better at managing our risk in this, both security and also just the adoptions tools that don't have this deterministic outcome. So, but there's also an opportunity here with experimentation. with what I'm saying is, companies can consider a lot more options, and that might even just be technical options when we're coming up to architectural decisions and optionality. We're able to explore a lot more in the same amount of time, and some of those things will actually help increase our confidence overall.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So if you've got confidence, I mean, obviously the next question you're going to be asked is, how can I measure my ROI? How can I, sort of demonstrate to the business that this is actually working? So I wanted to ask you, so how should leaders think about measuring whether AI is genuinely improving delivery?
It's a really good question, Kirsty.
Mm.
I think, harking back to what I was saying earlier, it's about how well the system performs. So measure system outcomes, not individual productivity theatre. That's nice, it's fantastic, but it's not what actually matters to your product.
Mm.
I would definitely advise introducing baseline metrics before diving deeply into AI assisted ways of working. And if you have them already, that's fantastic. It gives you a fantastic baseline to be able to see what impact they're making. Focus on flow and stability together. So lead time, deployment cadence, reliability, quality outcomes. Do be careful with lagging indicators and also with simplistic interpretations of delivery metrics. So tool usage, prompt counts, lines of code, they're very easy to collect, but they're rarely persuasive evidence of impact. In and of themselves, they don't actually say anything about the value that you're delivering to production. Leaders also do need to account for the real cost side of the equation. So licenses, tokens, experimentation overhead, vendor dependencies. It's often some of those costs are absorbed by the actual team members themselves, which means that you're hiding some of the cost of doing business. So I would advise for people to just kind of dipping their toes into it right now. So start simple. If you've got something like Dora or Space or whatever you have in place, build on that. Bring in some team member sentiment analysis to see how people are adapting to it. Mm-hmm. And then as time goes on, you can bring in some more AI-specific metrics. So that could be linear B, it could be DX, whatever's most appropriate. But start small.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So I guess really, another big topic here when you talk about, the change that people are trying to make is scaling. We all work with someone, even me as a non-practitioner, who is extremely effective with AI tools. We have these power users that are dotted across our teams and organization. So, how do we scale beyond these power users? So Warner, I guess I'd like to ask you, what is your advice for scaling that capability across an entire engineering group?
I think leveraging those power users, and that can be sometimes in the form of a center of excellence where you've got a team that is responsible for ensuring the safe adoption of tools and the effective adoption, like what we had with continuous delivery, but probably unlike continuous delivery where we've got the deployment patterns and standardized pipelines. I'm not sure if the future might prove me wrong, but I'm not sure if we're going to see such a cookie cutter approach to the workflows that we're seeing with AI. So I think there will be patterns, and but more importantly, patterns always need context. So in the context in which they're effective. So, by creating a pattern and expecting it to be reused everywhere, that's probably unrealistic, but there are going to be elements of that pattern that can be taken and applied in a different context. So how far we get with regards to consistency is yet to be seen. Because we are talking about low-level workflows here. So but I guess on that concept of a centre of excellence, it's not only important to be that sort of guiding light, but also to actually share knowledge with and work hand in hand with teams adopting AI to share knowledge, experience, and also an understanding of the intent and some of the how these systems are working, and then also act as a conduit back to understand the limitations of some of these tools in these various contexts. So there might be an opportunity to improve the tool. There might be just let's go ahead and work on an alternate approach for this scenario. But so I guess that pattern, that's a meta pattern, or I guess structure, is probably not too dissimilar to what we've seen with rollout of Agile and continuous delivery.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, I want to just a little bit. We're all adopting something new again. So there are a lot of lessons to be taken from when we adopted Agile and when we adopted cloud. And I do feel that not the only, but maybe the major difference now is that it's moving so much faster, which is why communication and shared understanding, and this is not working for me, and having someone to talk to in terms of that central excellence is so important, because within teams today, I think people can feel like, not quite sure what to do here, and you can feel alone.
So I guess it's up to everyone to share their experiences.
Yeah.
And it's, they could be showcases, they could be more of a community of practice where you've got like-minded people sharing their successes and their failures.
Yes.
So that's all part of the learning process, and I guess help distribute the knowledge and improve.
Yeah, that's right. And so I know certainly, like, we've distilled this into a little bit of a playbook here, but the main takeaway is obviously find some measure of consistency, with leadership support, enabling environments, making sure you've got the safe way is the, empowered way with the guardrails and so on. Measure and I guess understand what it is that's going to be telling you that things are moving in the right direction, and then really embed, which is all of that, having exemplar teams or sharing, doing all of those things. That's kind of how we've been approaching it, and it's proved to be quite a successful way to roll this out. But, leaving a playbook aside and, that kind of high level. So, Serge, if you were advising an engineering leader starting this journey today, what are the first 2 or 3 things that you would focus on?
Oh, good question. Look, I would say you need to have confidence in your delivery pipeline. You need to know that if something goes through that delivery pipeline, it is ready for production. You need metrics for understanding the delivery of value as a team. How much actual value are you delivering to production?
Yeah.
Third thing I'd probably say is this journey requires buy-in from the top down and the bottom up. So make
Yeah.
sure that everyone is actually part of the effort. You can't just drive change from the top down, and bottom-up grassroots change can hit an obstacle when it comes to the executive level. So make sure that everyone is aligned and facing the right way.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I guess to ask the question in a different way, Warner, what mistakes would you avoid?
Turning off the turning off the user prompts without actually understanding the impacts. So it just needs to be a conscious decision. It's obviously very important to move to those agentic workflows, but working within a isolated environment in which those tools can operate with a consideration towards especially the data that you're utilizing, the internet access, and that avoiding those trifecta that will allow data to be exploited with a malicious prompt. So look at where your prompt's coming from, the data it has access to, and where it can go. Those things, all three of them together, make the lethal trifecta. And that's with conscious thought, you can constrain an environment maybe only two of those things and introduce a bit of safety.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's the end of our, I guess, little conversation. We wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. You can ask them in the Q&A panel. You're more than welcome to ask anything. Warner and Sergei are here. But I'll kick off with one of my own. So we read a lot. There's been recent interviews that have come out. I think there was one with Boris Cheney and pragmatic engineer, and he was like, I run 5 agents in parallel, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. Like, how realistic is that, Warner? I'm going to ask you, to aspire to that as kind of like the pinnacle of, where we should be thinking about this as an organizational capability.
It's a really interesting question. Like, definitely, if you ask my wife, I just cannot multitask. So, but it's the and I guess I'm of the opinion you can't truly multitask. But I guess the interaction there is a lag between writing a prompt and getting an answer. So may as well utilize that time and maybe spawn another couple of agents and come back once you've got an answer. And really, that's the workflow. You're just checking in. It's not like you're looking at 5 things at once. You're just dividing your attention across multiple different things, and to a point where maybe the attention span gets consumed. And then sometimes it's going to be detailed work where you just need to be in one place and focusing on one thing. Yeah. So I think, I guess there's sort of single and multi-agent type steps that that Steve has identified, where I guess then if you're looking at multi-agent, sort of more orchestration, that's where you're looking at orchestrating and implementing a plan across multiple different agents. And very much hands off, and you review the outputs. So I think that's more of a sort of outsourced workflow, which is a different proposition altogether.
Yeah. Well, we've had a good question come in, which is, are you seeing agent skills, skills.io, adopted by teams, and what are the pros and cons of these? Serge or Warner, you want to start?
I can make a start on that. So, short answer, yes. Slightly longer answer, yes, but not universally. I definitely think there are pros of adopting the agent skills approach. It allows you to codify things at a team or a repository level, which otherwise people are essentially having to discover for themselves. And it allows you to codify the approach you want on a particular repository. Haven't found any real cons yet, although there is a bit of cognitive overhead. And it's one more thing you actually need to understand when approaching a code base. But yeah, definitely, I think there's a place for them. I think also one of the things that we collectively are trying to do is to build up reproducible sets of skills that we'll find useful in multiple contexts. So it's an ongoing effort. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. And I think, Serge, we should reiterate the point that you and I were talking about just before we came on the webinar, which is, and you started with it, but what we think now will evolve.
Absolutely. It is moving so quickly right now that to not, adapt your thinking would be short-sighted.
Yep, that's right.
I'll add one thing with the agentic skills versus commands. I guess skills are more implicit in the way that they'll be called, put in a simplistic way, versus commands, which are like slash commands in Claude Code, which are very explicit. I want you to look at this. So I think of maybe those things which are peripheral, looking at skills, where you might, something is not in the forefront of your mind. It might be to ensure some organizational standards across everything you do, versus, okay, I'm looking for a very specific thing and I want to follow a predefined workflow. So I guess horses for courses. There might be some, the grey areas there that I just haven't experienced yet.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Had another another question come through. So it says, as Serge mentioned, if a team limits AI use to building code, yes, they are not reaching their potential. Any tips or suggestions on how to integrate AI into team engagement and business analysis processes, and ideas on how to get business analysts and product owners on board, given they tend to be the least technical members and often see AI as something engineers do? That's a great question.
They may be the least technical members of the product teams, but I bet they use ChatGPT in their life outside work. So I think that's like the baseline for how to bring people along for that journey. I think also one of the things you can do to really close the loop for BAs, for product owners, is to actually expose some of that product value data, those metrics, in a way that AI agents can actually consume. So that might be a custom MCP server. It might be some type of output or report that's easily consumed by AI. Once that is part of the AI's decision-making context and people can actually use it to iterate on their ideas and to see in that, again, that AI context, the results of those ideas, that's how you lure people in. It'll require a bit of an education. It'll require probably a bit of pairing with those people, but they definitely have the skills and they definitely have that idea that AI can add impact. It's just they've been seeing it in outside of the engineering context. So definitely, there's things you can do.
Yeah. Okay. Another good question. There's been a lot of buzz around Claude Code and how it can help augment engineering work. I think probably we've talked about Claude Code. Sometimes the thinking around it feels a bit narrow, like it's seen as one size fits all. But okay. I'd love your take on this. What would a good approach look like to evaluate Claude Code's real impact on our delivery process? Where's the best place to start? And what mix of AI tools do you think we should explore? I knew someone was going to ask about tech stack. So let's, do you want to start with what's a good approach look like to evaluate its real impact on our delivery process with Claude Code?
I guess evaluating the delivery impact, if Claude Code is primarily aimed at engineers, but is increasingly being used outside of that context. And I think it's both non-technical team members starting to contribute, and it's also even the technical team members getting more context into other areas, being product ownership and design as well. So I think it's so multifaceted, and I think after listening to Boris talk about how Claude Code came to be, there'll probably be some development in that space to make it a bit more of a general purpose tool. But assessing the impact versus other tools, I think there's probably a few things to consider. As one is the licensing, how the models are made available, how you're getting organizational context into the tool, and then I guess something like space is a good measure, and how people are feeling about tools, in addition to some more targeted metrics on adoption and I guess qualitative surveys as well. So it's it's a difficult one to answer in completeness. So is there any other aspects you think we should cover?
Yeah, I did just wonder, Claude Code is great, and certainly I have heard a lot of our engineers talk about it recently as their tool de rigueur or their tool of choice. But there's always a trade-off.
Tool de jour, because it changes every day.
I feel like there's a really interesting conversation around the trade-offs of investing in a number of tools that the organization provides versus the amount of exploration and experimentation technical people generally tend to like to do. I know that every organization is different around enabling. Some people go all in on one tool and say, you can't have any other ones. Some people say, look, we're going to have a couple of tools and that's going to be it. And other people are, other organizations are a little bit, I guess, more broader. But if you have just one tool, then that's very easy to ensure good security and good privacy and good data practices. And there are also, I guess, learnings to be had organizationally and individually from investing in one tool. That's the more you use it, the better you get. However, my experience has been, in terms of the mix of AI tools, people like to change a lot. And so it's very difficult to recommend a standard mix of tools without knowing what change is going to come. I think you really need to balance your organizational policy around what your risk is. You know, do you have, I guess, a formal policy in place that makes sure people understand how they are allowed to use the tools, and then how much, I guess, risk do you want to bear? I mean, it does really come down to that, because you really need to make sure everybody's clear on, what the guidance is around the data and the, being used for the training of the models. So we don't tend to recommend tools because it's just too hard to walk that line at the moment. But what we do know is Claude Code is really popular now. Cursor is still really popular, and a lot of people like using tools like Notebook LLM, and then ChatGPT for summarization. I think your question around the mix is exactly like that. It does need to be a mix.
One thing I think it's worth adding to that is it's not just the particular flavor of AI assistant that you like. It's also the ecosystem around it. So things like custom MCP servers that expose relevant data in a secure fashion for your usage. That's really worth investing in. And that, that's an open protocol that will apply whether it's Claude Code, whether it's, Gemini CLI or whatever. And that's something that I won't say only you can do for yourself, because definitely you can buy some off-the-shelf connectors that'll be useful for you. But it's definitely worth looking more deeply into it. That's, again, allows us to democratize the use of AI coding tools and AI agents by providing relevant data for every stage of the product lifecycle.
Yeah. And I guess also too, when you're talking about evaluating how effective it is, you really need to pick the right use cases and start small. Decide as an organization what would make the most difference to you in terms of like a bottleneck to improve, or what might be a customer something that you might want to solve. And then start with that and make sure you're measuring, and then find out what works, and then you can scale that to the other area of the business. Yeah, so consistency, measurement, and then obviously scaling. We've got a few more minutes for questions. I might ask one of my own. I guess I wanted to ask, what do you guys like using? What have you seen work well in terms of like a tech stack at a team level? Not just individually, because I know that's a very different answer. What have you seen work well at a team level in terms of like the tools that you use, and why?
Personally, Claude Code with custom skills, versioned at the repository level, with, again, specific MCP context servers, have produced a really good result. And a result that seems to be relatively easily scalable, relatively structurally repeatable, and relatively easy for people to get on board with. That being said, ask me again in 3 months.
Yeah, okay, no problem. What about you, Warner?
I think, for my workflows, I'm not as hands-on these days, so Claude Code tends to really be a good level of interaction for me and the code, but at a repository level only. So I think where the challenge for me is looking at a higher level is getting a good view over a distributed fleet of services, and understanding how cross-cutting change might be applied, or understanding, where the dead bodies are. So getting that much context into a prompt and getting meaningful output is the challenging part. So some of the tools which are able to treat the repository as, I guess, more of a graph, and they're sort of tools that I want to explore. And but then, the ability to do so is, just adding something else to the overall ecosystem, which is not as just easy as doing an npm install. It's needs to be evaluated and considered. But that I think I'm starting to see a lot of commands, I would say, being used to look at each repository to create that memento or that artifact that can be then consumed at a higher level. So that's a good thing, but keeping that current and keeping that relevant is another question entirely, because by the time the documentation is written, it's already stale, even if AI writes it. So but apart from that, like from Notebook LM is really great at having a body of knowledge that you're asking questions of. And I've also used Gemini in the interactive mode, I think it's called, on my phone, actually, just to brainstorm and use that as my rubber duck.
Yeah, that's good.
One other thing, sorry, just before we move on, is, and I suppose it's kind of an AI tool, but I have found it extremely useful, is spec-driven development, specifically SpecKit from GitHub, just as a structured approach that forces you to clarify your thinking a little bit before you start creating code. And that's regardless of whether it's Claude Code or Gemini or Copilot. As a structured approach, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people say that.
Token heavy though.
Yes, heard that too. Last question before we close. Someone has said, are you seeing better success in orgs that provide their teams with in-process guidance, coaching in each phase across the life cycle? At the moment, it feels like many orgs' approach is to open up access to a buffet of tools, and teams are left to self-serve and figure it out. I mean, yes, I'm just going to say yes before I throw over. That's exactly why we wanted to have this session today, is that you can't just throw tools at a team. You won't get the team level and delivery impact, but obviously over to you guys.
Well, look, I will say that you 100% get a really large token bill when you play it that way. But what you do need to do is to, yes, provide tooling, provide space for experimentation, but give it some structure, give it some type of idea of what the outcomes you want from this process are. There will be waste at the start, and you do have to understand that, but there'll be far more waste with far less value produced if you don't actually take somewhat of a structured approach here.
Yeah.
I would say that if you rolled out Jira and expected everyone to be agile as a result, you would get pretty bad results. I think the same can be said here. But Serge's point on what are your goals, really important. Also understanding where you're at, because the investment might be needed in some of those foundational skills or approaches that are required in order to make most effective use of AI. So that might be test-driven development, or it might be a modular architecture. So yeah, I guess some coaching or some advice is really important at that level.
And with that, I would like to close the session and thank very much everybody who joined us today. We will be sending you very shortly a recording of the session. And once again, thank you from Serge and Warren myself for joining us today. Farewell.
See you, folks. Thanks for having us.